Hi guys, I hope you are doing great today because we are going to create an Azure Synapse workspace and see some basic functionalities and capabilities of this resource, of this tool. We can access data from the data lake using the serverless option, but we can also create a dedicated SQL pool and move the data there. We can use data flows to create data pipelines like we could do on Azure Data Factory, but we can also use notebooks and write code in multiple languages like in Databricks. And we can also connect Power BI to this dedicated SQL pool and retrieve data from there. In other words, Synapse is trying to be a one-stop shop and have all the tools in one place. Let's start by creating the Synapse workspace. On the search bar, type Azure Synapse Analytics and click here. Click Create Synapse Workspace. Provide the resource group. You don't need to provide a managed resource group here. Workspace name, uh, Synapse test. That's fine. Account. Name of the data lake, example video 123 is my data lake, and the file system name, that's the containers. I go with the first one. Here it says we will automatically grant the workspace and data access to the specified data lake using the storage blob data contributor. Perfect, so we don't need to do that ourselves. Next, security. We need to provide a password for the serverless option. Let me provide the password here. Allow network access. Okay, that would be fine. And next, networking. Allow connections from all IP addresses. That's fine because we are just playing around. Create and review. Perfect. This will take a while. 5 USD dollars for the serverless option. Okay. Create. It will take a few minutes, so I will come back when it's ready. The Synapse workspace has been created. Let's go to resource group and click on Synapse workspace. Open that. Click Open Synapse Studio. Click here. This is going to open the studio, the Synapse Studio. And here we can write some code. Let's see. The first thing we are going to do here is create a link service to Azure Data Storage Gen 2, which is the data lake in our case. I have already created one, but let's create a new one. Click on Connect to External Data here. Azure Data Lake, continue. Azure subscription, select your subscription, your storage account, authentication type, service principal, Azure storage again, service principal ID. Let's go back here on home and click on Azure Active Directory, go to app registrations. I have already created a service principal, and that would be this application ID here. We copy that, we paste it here. We click on Azure Key Vault because I have already stored the secret for the service principal in Azure Key Vault. So we are going to here, Azure Key Vault, we have to create a new one actually. And we need a link service from Synapse to Azure Key Vault, right? And that would be like this. We have to choose the subscription, Azure Key Vault name, the Key Vault name, and this is the system assigned managed identity. By default, the system creates a managed identity in order to access the Key Vault. and we can test the connection here, create. So we created a linked service to have access to the Key Vault from Synapse, and now we are going to create a link service to access the data lake. But we want the connection to Azure Key Vault because we have stored the service principal key in the Key Vault, right? And secret name, if we go back to the Key Vault here and we go secrets, and here I have stored the secret, and I copy this name, I paste it here, edit secret name, I provide the name manually, latest version, that's fine, test connection failed. Why did it fail? Because this managed identity that we created in order to access the Key Vault does not have access to the Key Vault. So what we need to do here is take the name of Synapse, so Synapse Apple test, go into the Key Vault, open that, open access policies, create access policy, select the template, next Synapse Apple test, which is the workspace for Synapse, click next, create, and now as you can see, this application Synapse has access to the Azure Key Vault. If we click test connection again, yep, it says connection successful, perfect. We click create and we click publish, Azure Key Vault linked service and the Azure Data Lake Storage linked service, publish. And now we create a new linked service. We have access to the data lake. As you can see, this is container, the first container, this is the second container, the third container. So let's select data from this products folder, which is actually a table. We can do that by clicking right click and new SQL script, select top 100 records, file type, I have it in Parquet format, and it will bring up this automated query, which is select top 100 from open row set bulk, then you provide the data lake path here with the folder, double asterisks, double stars at the end because we want to load all the Parquet files, and if we run it, it will execute the query and bring the data from the data lake, which is quite cool if you think about it. It takes some time to retrieve the data. As you can see, it's not very fast. It took 17 seconds to load 100 records. Performance-wise, this is not what you want, but the serverless option is to explore data and select here, you select straight from the data lake. Now we can also create an external table from the data lake, and we can do that if we go back here in the container. Let's create a new table from this sellers folder, create external table, and it's going to bring up all the query and how you can create an external table. Now we have to provide SQL database, and let's say test, and we are going to create this database now. We are going to load the data into this database. External table name, test using SQL script, and now we have the code here and all the steps that we need to perform in order to load data from the data lake and then copy this data into an external table. This is the serverless option. The first thing we need to do is to actually create an external file format. You see here, if not exists, select from external file formats where name. This is the name. Create external file format for Apache files with format type Apache. And then if we run this, and it loads and it creates this file format successfully, and then we can move on to the next query, which is to create an external data source that actually points to the data lake. You can do that by using this query, select from external data sources where this is the data lake, and we create an external data source, we point to the data lake, we run this, and it created an external data source. So now when we create a table and when we want to copy the data from the data lake, we write create external table test, that's the column names, etc., and then with open brackets location sellers, which is the folder name, slash double asterisks for to get all the data. The data source is the data source we created here that points to the data lake, and the file format is Apache format that we defined up here. Let's create the external table by running the code, and here we select the top 100 records, and it's going to bring back the top 100 records, which actually I think I have only 10 records. As you can see, it takes a bit of time, it's slow. I have 10 records. Now, this is the serverless option, and what does that mean? Like, what does serverless? I'm going to quote the documentation I found online. Serverless implies that Microsoft manages and allocates the compute power of the SQL pool. There is no infrastructure or to set up or clusters to maintain. A serverless SQL pool stores and computes large-scale data in a distributed data processing system. The serverless SQL pool is created simultaneously when you create your Synapse workspace resource in Azure. So for each Synapse workspace, there is a default built-in endpoint for a serverless SQL database. There is no data warehouse measure unit to choose from or to have more or less compute power, so you cannot scale up or scale down as you please, because everything is managed by Microsoft. It's auto-scaling. As a result, a new payment model has been implemented. It's pay per query, or in other words, you only pay for the amount of data that is processed. So it's pretty good when you want to explore data and play around and have small data sets. That's fine. If you want to build a whole data warehouse, you need to create a dedicated SQL pool. This is what we're going to do now. Click on Manage and click on SQL Pools. Click a new SQL pool. Let's say test performance, the lowest because we are playing around. Additional settings, existing data none, create and review, create. And now this is going to create a dedicated SQL pool. And we can bring data from the data lake, create a data pipeline actually, bring the data from the data lake and store the data into this dedicated SQL pool that we are going to also create a table inside that. But let it finish. So it's deploying right now. Let it finish. And let's go back into Azure Synapse. We have the dedicated SQL endpoint here and the serverless endpoint here. So here, if you copy that endpoint and you use Microsoft SQL Management Studio, you can access this dedicated SQL endpoint, create tables, etc., etc. The same with the serverless SQL endpoint. Or you can use Azure Data Studio. This is another option as well, but personally, I prefer the Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio. Let me switch to the SQL Server Management Studio and I will show you how you can create a connection to this dedicated SQL pool. So here we click Connect Database Engine. We paste the server name that I just showed you that from the dedicated SQL pool. We provide the password and we access the dedicated SQL pool. As you can see, we have databases, test schema, external tables. We don't have anything here, but we can actually create a new table, not an external table, a new table. Let me copy the create table command here and let's run this and let's create this table here. Now we have created a new table, click refresh, you are going to see the table. If you select top 1000 records, you will see nothing because of course it's empty. Let's go back to Azure. By the way, you can see the dedicated SQL pool here on the left panel. If you click SQL pools, you will see the test. And here, if you click on the test, you will see the dedicated SQL pool and the connection strings and all this cool stuff, right? But let's open the workspace now again. And here, click on data, click on, actually, let's go, click home, click ingest, and we want to perform a copy activity. Click built-in copy task, run once now, that's it. Connection, Azure workspace, okay, that's fine. We need to specify the path that we want to get the data from. Let's go into container 2 sellers. I just use this example because I don't have a lot of data. I want it to be fast recursively to get all the data. Next, Parquet file here, preview data is going to load the data you have under this folder. Of course, it takes some time. It's not the fastest tool on the earth, but it does the job. Next, destination type, we want dedicated SQL pool. Azure Synapse dedicated SQL pool, select test target, use existing table. We select the table we just created. Next, auto create a destination, arrow mapping, seller ID, that's fine. Next, not copy command because we are going to get an error, I think. Yeah, it says copy command cannot be used together with type conversion because if we go previously, that's UTF-8, it goes to varchar, so we don't want this conversion, right? We click on next and bulk insert. Next, and here you will see what is going to happen. We are going to copy data from the data lake into Azure Synapse dedicated SQL pool. Click next. You will see now here it's deploying the solution and it's going to run the pipeline and insert data into the database. So here you will find the pipeline that it created. We have the copy data here. You could do it manually. I just click on ingest one time, but you can create the pipeline here where you go here in this pipe, click on the pipe, you will see the data pipeline. And here under workspace, you will see the dedicated SQL pool as well. Now, this is the table that we created in the dedicated SQL pool. We can select the data from here. You will see the data, or from the SQL Management Studio. You have, both options. You can choose whatever you like. And now another thing we can do here is to create a data pipeline using data flows, right? Let's go under pipelines, create a new pipeline, move and transform data flow. We throw that here, settings. Okay, that's fine. Data flow, new data flow, Azure data source, add source here, data set. So let's select, we have already a data set here. I think it points to the data lake. Click open just to make sure. Yeah, it points to the container 2 sellers. If we preview data, yep, we can see the data. So we can use this data source as the source, the source dataset. Allow schema drift. You can type infer drifted column types, so it will automatically try to infer the data types of the columns, but it's not. But you can also do it manually. Source option. It has a lot of configuration here that you can play, use current partitioning, single partitioning, etc., etc. You can inspect and data preview, but you can actually have to turn on the data flow debug mode. Okay, now you are going to pay for the debug option, so be prepared for this. If you click the add button, let's create a new column. Let's call it say date 2 column, enter an expression. Let's play around with the add days here, add days, so we can use current timestamp or something. Where is current timestamp and plus 5 days, so the current timestamp plus 5 days. Save and finish. That would create a new column called date 2, or create date 2 just for fun. And then we can also play around and create a data pipeline using all these cool features: join, conditional split, exists, union, lookup. This is the graphical interface, and yes, it has many options, but if you actually try to use it at large scale programs, data pipelines, it's quite cumbersome, but it does have a lot of options. So let's create a filter here and enter a filter. Let's say that seller ID has to be greater equals to 5. Save and finish. Yeah, it's an error because actually seller ID is of data type string when we load it, which is not the best. Source options, protect. Okay, override schema here. Let's say created seller ID is integer of type int. Okay, and now it's not going to give any error here. That's fine. And then use the sync, the destination, and let's create a new folder back in the data lake. Let's say under the same container, just we are playing around now. So sellers 3, right? That's an empty directory, and we have to point to this empty directory, the same data source, but actually we are going to open, actually we need a new data source that points to seller 3 directory, continue, Apache files. That's the drawback when you are using Data Factory or the data flows in general. You cannot write in Delta format. That's this is certainly a downside. So anyway, we continue, we create the same link service, we point to the right directory. So one data source for this directory, data set for this directory, allow schema drift, etc., etc. I think we are fine now. So if we run the pipeline, okay, validate, okay, that's fine. Now, if we run this pipeline here, we have to wait for the debug session to um, to be activated. Otherwise, we cannot click on debug. So here it is, just on time. Cluster is ready. Let's debug, and you will see now under output, it's going to run the data pipeline, the data flow, status in progress, and when it's done, we will see a party file under the new empty directory that we created, which is perfect because we performed a few transformations, very basic stuff. Of course, imagine if you have multiple transformations. Now it's good data flows. As you can see, this is data factories, like data factory here. Pretty much you have this user interface, you drag and drop all the you know, like functionalities you want and the transformations you want to make. You don't write any code. Actually, you just select functions here and there and you configure everything, which is nice. But if you have very complicated queries, no, you don't. Well, personally, I don't want to use Data Factory to build data flows, to build a very complex data pipeline. I prefer to write SQL and call a notebook with SQL, with SQL, and run this notebook. As you can see, it's very slow. Another thing, now, of course, I selected the cheapest option available. However, it's 10 records and it took like almost 2 minutes for 10 records. So if we refresh here, you will see the parquet file. Now, if we go into data here and you click on test 2, you will see sellers 3 and select top 10 records. You will see now the 5 records. I think we should have 5 records or 6 because we filtered the data. Yep, that's perfect. Seller ID is 5 greater than 5 and we have created a new column, right? Perfect. So this is another way to actually move and transform data using the data pipeline option here in Azure Synapse. You also you can create a data lake straight from here, like it provides you provide the path and you select the data straight from the data lake. Of course, it's slow if you do it that way. You can also build dedicated SQL pools like we did here, and you will see the data, the table we have here, and you can also play around with that. And you can also create a notebook, right? Click here, develop notebook. Now it has many languages, if I remember correctly, language PySpark, Scala, Net, and yeah, no, it had C#. Okay, that's cool. Spark SQL and Spark R. So let's click PySpark Python. We have to create a Spark cluster, Spark pool here. Click under Manage, click Apache Spark pools, new one, the cheapest one of course as always, and small one, test 1, 2, 3, that's fine, review and create. And we created an Apache Spark pool, and we have the cluster now. We attach it to the cluster. We have to wait a little bit for it to finish. It takes, I guess, a couple of minutes. Refresh, that's fine. Okay, we don't want that, but anyway, so let me copy a code that we can access the data lake. It's exactly like in Databricks. You write the same code, PySpark, right? If you let me attach the cluster and run this one, and it's going to create an Apache Spark session, and we are going to get data straight from the data lake. Right now, the good thing is, of course, when you use code, you can convert Parquet files into Delta files and play around with all those cool stuff. But when you use the user interface, remember there is no Delta option when you sync. So it's not exactly the best option to use the user interface. It's better to write code and notebooks. Of course, as I mentioned before in another video, using Data Factory is good for orchestration. So there is this option as well. And that's how but you can also have this notebook here and the SQL script and the data flows and play around with all of them. Now, what is basically an SQL pool, the dedicated SQL pool that we created here, this test here, was known as Azure SQL Data Warehouse and is a big data solution that provides data storage in a relational table. It improves query performance and limits the storage cost. You define the compute strategy and the scaling is manual. You pay per data warehouse unit. Okay, it's done. Only 4 minutes to start the cluster. I'm joking, apparently that's sarcasm. We can now display the data frame. You can see here the data frame. These are a few things you can do in Synapse. The major question now is it better than Databricks? It's very difficult to say, really. It really depends on the situation, the department, the company, the developers. In theory, Azure Synapse is more suited for data analysis and for those who are familiar with SQL and are coming from an ETL background. Databricks is more suited for streaming, AI, and data science workloads. If you're coming from an ETL background, Synapse would look more familiar at first. When we migrated to Azure, I suggested Synapse because that's what I read on the documentation. And we tried Synapse and Databricks simultaneously. We experimented with both. And after a lot of consideration, we concluded that we like Databricks more. Of course, everyone is different. You have to play around and see what you like and also what the company needs and can afford, right? This is everything for today. If you like the video, click the like button and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you.